I think there's an issue that's going on, especially in more metropolitan areas where you've got a lot of churches in an area. Now, if you're in the rural areas, you're probably more dependent upon Christ, which is really what we should be. But I think in our metropolitan areas, I noticed this in Michigan, where we had hundreds of churches on every corner. Not they were all different stripes, but it can happen in L.A. area or San Juan Capistrano, where you guys are. Um, is that we play a complicated game of Red Rover? Remember when we were kids? I don't know if you remember. We played Red Rover, send somebody Red over. And I think pastors have pragmatically come to the point where they say, let's play a game of Red Rover. And maybe I can go to I'm here and I can go to that church over there, and maybe I'll woo some of their leaders over here. So pragmatically I just fill a hole with the guy from over there. Now, maybe that guy at that church is really equipping leaders and doing a great job, and he's got more than what he needs, and he's happy to do that. But most of them are not doing that as far as equipping them. And so we're just sitting back, we're crossing our fingers, and we're hoping against hope that God somehow will drop, ready to go, plug and play leaders into our midst. And instead of saying, you know what, if God is sovereign, it's not a question, but since God is sovereign, we believe he has sovereignly brought these people to our church. Therefore, my fiduciary duty and responsibility as a pastor, biblical responsibility, is to say, I need to intentionally equip and train these people, not sitting there wishing and hoping that somebody else would show up, but say, God, I'm going to be faithful here. Now, God in that in blessing that faithfulness may bring ready to play, ready to plug and play leaders to your church. But God expects us to be faithful and intentional in developing the leaders of people that he's brought to us. And I think we can easily look in some of our churches and go, well, have you seen the people that are in our church? Like, how are you going to make leaders out of these people? Well, I think the Bible is full of examples where God took ordinary people and did extraordinary things with them. And so,
Yeah, I think as it relates to the topic of leadership, and particularly how do you develop leaders in your local church, I think it's important to remember that leadership is a gift. It's one of the spiritual gifts that Paul lists in Corinthians or Romans, I think. But it is also something that is uh, common to every man. God has uniquely designed men to be leaders in their homes, in their workplaces. And I think what's happening is I yes and amen everything to what Dave said, but I think a lot of churches aren't calling their men to be leaders in every sphere of their life. As men understand that the biblical word for leadership, it means to stand in front. Men need to be the ones who are taking the initiative in their homes theologically to protect their family, to provide for their family. Men should be the ones taking the initiative in the children's ministry. All of our elders at our church teach in our children's ministry. I think we have more male teachers in our children's ministry than we have women teachers. But that all flows from the pulpit, and it flows from highlighting and encouraging and inspiring men to be leaders in their home. From that, you then get naturally men who want to stand up and be leaders in the church.
yeah, and I think part of this conversation has to go to how are we defining a leader? Are we defining a leader solely as an elder or a deacon, or are we defining it as somebody who is like what Ryan said is willing to take a stand, lead his family, lead his home, be involved in church? Maybe God hasn't called you to be an elder. Like we would argue, not everybody is called to be an
Yep.
elder. So
Amen.
don't become an elder. Don't think that you should become an elder. Now, I would argue that most men, if not all believing men, should be qualified and somehow equipped and trained to be a deacon. Like that's a biblical principle. But whether or not you have that title or position does not mean you can't lead in some way. So I think in the concept of leadership, we have to just be careful to say are we talking about where are the elders and deacons, or are we talking about no, actually our men step up and take the lead and take a stand like what Ryan's saying.
The LifeRay research poll that Chris referred to, it says developing leaders and volunteers,
And
77% that.
volunteers, yeah.
And so I think as I read this, as they're talking about leaders, I don't think it's exclusively at least the statistic we're talking about elders and deacons.
Right.
Yep.
And so as I think about leaders, again, I just think that helping men, when men are leading in their everyday life, they get excited and empowered to lead in other places. And so naturally then men will organically start to lead in the church, but then you need to develop places for them to be equipped as leaders for the local church. But in general, I personally think that that's a reason why pastors struggle. And I would say this too on the other part. I think that going back to a previous episode we did on the seeker-sensitive church, I think that what's happened is a lot of pastors, they promote the idea of the celebrity. So the people come to church and they hear me preach, and that's the extent of church. And that's not really the work of what a biblical shepherd is. Shepherds are to teach, but they're to do more than that. They're to equip their people for the work of the ministry as well.